I'd always believed I had a good life. A steady marriage with Tom, a cozy house in suburban Chicago, and our son Jake thriving at college. Tom was the dependable type, worked long hours at the dealership, brought home flowers on anniversaries, and kissed me goodnight like clockwork. I'd convinced myself that was enough. That's what happiness looked like after 23 years together, right? But then there was Alex, Jake's best friend since they were scrawny kids trading Pokemon cards. At 19, he'd grown into someone I barely recognized, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a grin that felt like it could unravel secrets. I didn't notice it at first, the way his gaze lingered when he'd stop by to see Jake. A quick glance over the rim of his soda can, a flicker of something in those hazel eyes when I'd laugh at one of his dumb jokes. It was subtle, like a whisper you're not sure you heard. But once I caught it, I couldn't unsee it. It started innocently enough. Jake was home for spring break, and Alex tagged along like always. They'd sprawl out in the living room, playing video games until the early hours, their laughter echoing through the house. I'd bring them snacks, chips, sodas, sometimes a plate of cookies, and Alex would always say, "Thanks, Emily, you're the best." Nothing unusual there. He'd said it 100 times before. But this time, when I set the tray down, his fingers brushed mine. Just for a second. A tiny, electric jolt shot up my arm, and I froze. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. Tom was upstairs, probably asleep with the TV still buzzing, and Jake was too engrossed in his game to notice. Alex's eyes met mine, and there it was again, that look. Like he saw me, really saw me, in a way I hadn't been seen in years. I mumbled something about laundry and bolted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Tom, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. It was ridiculous. I was 44, a mom, a wife. Alex was a kid, barely old enough to vote. But the next day, it happened again. Jake had run to the store for more energy drinks, leaving Alex sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I was folding towels in the kitchen when he wandered in, leaning against the counter, like he owned the place. "You ever get tired of this?" he asked, nodding toward the stack of laundry. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. I laughed it off, told him it was just life, but he stepped closer. "You deserve more than just life, Emily." My breath caught. No one had said anything like that to me since. I couldn't even remember. Before I could respond, Jake's car rumbled into the driveway, and Alex slipped back to the living room like nothing had happened. But something had. A crack had formed in the perfect little world I'd built, and I didn't know how to seal it shut. The real turning point came a week later. Jake was back at school, but Alex texted him about some old game console he'd left in the garage. Tom insisted he come over to grab it since he'd be out late at a work dinner. I didn't think much of it, until Alex showed up at the door, rain-soaked and grinning, his t-shirt clinging to him in a way that made me look twice. I let him in, handed him a towel, and told him to wait while I dug through the garage. He followed me anyway, chatting about college, his part-time job at the coffee shop, little things that filled the silence. We found the console buried under a box of Christmas lights, and I laughed when he held it up like a trophy. "You're a lifesaver, Emily," he said, and there was that look again. Only this time, he didn't stop at looking. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the rain on him, and murmured, "You're so beautiful, you know that?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I should have stepped back, laughed it off, told him to go home. But I didn't. For one reckless, stupid moment, I let myself feel it, the rush of being wanted, the thrill of something forbidden. Then the headlights of Tom's car swept through the window, and I snapped out of it, shoving the console into his hands and practically pushing him out the door. After that, I couldn't look at Alex the same way. Every time Jake mentioned him, my stomach twisted. I told myself it was guilt, that I'd dodged a bullet, and could just move on. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Because a part of me, a part one didn't want to admit existed, kept wondering what would have happened if Tom hadn't come home early. And that scared me more than anything. The guilt ate at me for days. I'd catch myself staring out the kitchen window, half expecting Alex to show up unannounced, half hoping he wouldn't. Tom noticed something was off. He asked if I was okay over breakfast one morning, his brow furrowed in that sweet, clueless way of his. I smiled, said I was just tired, and he bought it. He always did. But the truth was clawing at me, and I needed to put it to rest. So when Jake called to say he and Alex were coming home for the weekend, I made a plan. Not to confront Alex, not exactly, but to prove to myself I could handle it. That whatever this was, it was over before it even started. I'd be the perfect mom, the perfect wife, and keep him at arm's length. Easy, right? They rolled in on Friday night, all noise and chaos, dragging duffel bags and takeout bags into the house. Alex was his usual self, cracking jokes, raiding the fridge like he lived here. But I felt his eyes on me every time I turned around. When I handed him a soda, our fingers didn't touch this time, and I thought, good. Boundaries. Tom was home that night, sprawled on the recliner with a beer, oblivious as ever. The boys stayed up late, and I went to bed early, thinking I'd dodged the bullet again. But around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty, my throat dry as sandpaper. Tom was snoring beside me, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge downstairs. I slipped on my robe and padded to the kitchen, flipping on the light, and there he was. Alex, standing by the sink in the dark, a glass of water in his hand. He didn't flinch, just turned to me with that slow, dangerous smile. Couldn't sleep either, huh? His voice was low, rough, like he'd been waiting for me. I should have turned around. Should have gone back upstairs and locked the door. But my feet wouldn't move. You shouldn't be down here, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He set the glass down, took a step closer. Why not? He asked, and there was a challenge in it, a dare. My pulse raced. Because it's not right, Alex. You know that. He tilted his head, studying me like he could see straight through the lie I was telling myself. You're so beautiful, he said again, softer this time, and it hit me like a punch. I hadn't heard those words in so long. Not from Tom, not from anyone. They sank into me, filling cracks I didn't know I had. He stepped closer still, close enough that I could feel the heat off him, and for one wild second, I thought he might kiss me. I thought I might let him. But then the floor creaked upstairs, Tom, probably getting up for the bathroom, and the spell broke. I backed away, whispered, "Go to bed," and fled to my room, my heart pounding so loud I was sure Tom would hear it. The next morning, I couldn't look at him. Jake and Alex were at the table, scarfing down pancakes like nothing had happened, while I busied myself at the stove, flipping extras just to keep my hands busy. Tom shuffled in, kissed my cheek, and asked how I'd slept.
Fine, I lid, forcing a smile.
Alex didn't say a word to me, but I felt his stare burning into my back. When they left for the day, some plan to hit them all, I sagged against the counter, relief and regret warring inside me. I'd stopped it. Nothing had happened. But why did it feel like I'd lost something anyway? That should have been the end of it. I told myself it was a dumb, fleeting moment I'd bury and forget. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. A month later, Jake called to say Alex had landed a summer job nearby and needed a place to crash for a few weeks. Tom, being Tom, offered our guest room without even asking me. He's a good kid, he said over dinner, oblivious to the way my fork froze halfway to my mouth. It'll be nice to have him around. I nodded, smiled, said all the right things, but inside I was screaming. Alex, in my house every day? I couldn't avoid him now, not his eyes, not his voice, not the pull I felt every time he was near. When he showed up with his beat-up suitcase and that same crooked grin, I knew I was in trouble. And this time, there'd be no running away. The first week was torture. Alex blended into our routine like he belonged, eating breakfast with us, helping Tom mow the lawn, even offering to wash dishes after dinner. He was charming, polite, the perfect houseguest. Tom adored him. "Kid's got a good head on his shoulders," he'd say, clapping Alex on the back. I'd nod along, keeping my distance, but it was impossible to ignore him completely. He'd catch me alone sometimes, passing in the hallway, grabbing coffee in the morning, and there'd be that look again, quiet and intense, like a secret we weren't supposed to share. I'd brush past, mutter something about chores, and lock myself in the laundry room until my pulse settled. I could handle this, I told myself. I was stronger than whatever this was. But then came the night that changed everything. Tom was out of town for a dealership conference, and Jake had gone to visit his girlfriend upstate. It was just me and Alex in the house, a coincidence I hadn't planned for. I'd spent the day avoiding him, hiding behind busy work. But by evening, I ran out of excuses. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, when he wandered in with a bowl of popcorn and plopped onto the couch. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already settling in. I should have said no, made up some excuse, but I just shrugged. We watched in silence for a while, some dumb reality show filling the air, until he turned to me and said, "You ever wonder where your life could have been?" It wasn't the question that threw me, it was the way he said it, like he'd been thinking about it for me. I laughed, tried to play it off. "What, like I missed my shot at being a rock star?" He didn't laugh back. "No," he said, his voice steady. "Like if you'd picked a different path. One where you didn't settle."
Settle. The word hit me like a slap.
I never said it out loud, not even to myself, but there it was, hanging between us. I didn't settle. I snapped, sharper than I meant to. I have a good life. A husband who loves me, a son I'm proud of. And what about you? He cut in, leaning closer. What do you get, Emily? My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He was right there, inches away, and the air felt thick, charged, like a storm about to break. "You deserve more," he whispered, and before I could stop myself, I whispered back, "Maybe I do." It wasn't a kiss, wasn't anything physical, just words, raw and honest, spilling out after years of being locked away. But it felt bigger than anything I'd ever done. He didn't push further, just sat back, handed me the popcorn, and turned to the TV like we hadn't just cracked open my whole world. I barely slept that night, replaying it, wondering what more even meant. By morning, I had a plan, not to run toward Alex, but to take back something for myself. Something Tom, bless his heart, couldn't give me anymore. And Alex? He'd be the spark, not the fire. Tom came home the next day, all smiles and stories about his trip. Alex was still there, charming as ever, but I saw him differently now, not as a temptation, but as a wake-up call. I started small. Signed up for a painting class I'd always wanted to try. Booked a weekend trip with old college friends I hadn't seen in years. Tom raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, said it was good to see me getting out there. Alex noticed too. One afternoon, while Tom was at work, he found me sketching in the backyard and grinned. "Looks like you're finding your more," he said. I smiled back, but it wasn't flirty anymore. It was gratitude. "Guess I am," I replied. He didn't need to know the rest, that I decided to turn his little game around. See, Alex thought he was the one stirring things up, pulling me out of my shell. But I'd been watching him too, how he thrived on attention, how he dangled those looks and words like bait. He'd woken me up, sure, but I wasn't about to let him hold that over me. So, I flipped the script. I kept him close, but not too close. Let him think he was still in the driver's seat while I took control of my own story. When he'd linger in the kitchen, I'd ask him about his dreams, his plans, turning the focus back on him until he squirmed. When he'd toss out one of those loaded compliments, I'd thank him sweetly and change the subject, leaving him hanging. It was subtle, satisfying revenge. No yelling, no tears, just me reclaiming the power he thought he had. By the time summer ended, Alex was the one off balance. He'd mutter excuses to leave the room when I'd get too chatty, his confidence shaken. Jake came back to pick him up, and as they loaded the car, Alex gave me one last look. Not the bold, daring one I'd gotten used to, but something softer, almost confused. "Take care, Emily," he said, and I waved, calm as could be. "You too, Alex. Good luck out there." He climbed into the passenger seat, and I watched them drive off, feeling lighter than I had in years. Tom noticed the change, too. Over dinner that night, he reached for my hand and said, "You seem happy lately." I squeezed back, smiled, and told him, "I am." And I meant it. Alex had lit the match, but I'd built the fire, quietly, carefully, on my terms. Revenge didn't need to be loud or messy. Sometimes it was just taking back what you'd forgotten was yours all along. And as I sat there, sketching plans for my next adventure, I knew I'd never settle again. Not for anyone. I thought that was the end of it. Alex driving off, me stepping into this new version of myself, stronger and surer than I'd been in years. Tom and I settled back into our rhythm, but it felt different now, like I'd shifted the weight of our marriage just enough to breathe easier. I threw myself into my painting classes, filling the guest room with canvases of bold blues and fiery reds, colors I hadn't known I had in me. My friends from college started calling more, and soon we were planning brunches and laughing over wine like we were 20 again. Life was good, better than good. I'd taken Alex's spark and turned it into something real, something mine. But the thing about sparks? They don't always die out when you think they do. It was late August when I got the first message. I was wiping paint off my hands, the phone buzzing on the counter, when I saw his name pop up. Alex. Just a simple, "Hey, how's it going?" with a smiley face. Innocent enough, right? I almost didn't reply, considered letting it fade into the void of unanswered texts, but curiosity got the better of me. "Good," I typed back. "How's your job?" That should have been it. A quick check-in, nothing more. But then he wrote again. "It's okay. Miss the popcorn nights, though." My stomach flipped. I could have left it there, let the silence bury it, but my fingers moved before my brain caught up. Yeah, those were fun. And just like that, the door I'd thought I'd locked cracked open again. We texted on and off for a few days, nothing heavy, just small talk about his coffee shop gig, my latest painting, Jake's new girlfriend. It felt harmless, like catching up with an old friend. Tom didn't notice. He was too busy with a big sale at work, coming home late and crashing early. I told myself it was fine. Alex was miles away, back at college, and I was in control now. But then the tone shifted. One night, after I'd sent a picture of a sunset I'd painted, he replied, "You're amazing, Emily. Always were." There was again that pull, that dangerous warmth creeping back in. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, and typed, "Thanks," before shutting my phone off for the night. I wasn't going down that road again. I couldn't. But Alex didn't let it drop. The messages kept coming, little compliments, casual questions, each one tugging at that thread I'd tried so hard to cut. "Saw a woman today who reminded me of you," he'd write, or "Bet you're killing it in that art class." I'd respond, keeping it short, polite, but he was relentless. And the more he pushed, the more I felt that old flicker, the one I'd buried under paintbrushes and weekend getaways. It wasn't guilt this time, or even temptation. It was annoyance. He'd had his moment, played his part, and I'd moved on. Why couldn't he? I decided to ignore him, let the texts pile up unanswered. That worked for a week, until he showed up at my door. It was a Saturday, Tom out golfing with his buddies, me in the kitchen experimenting with a new cookie recipe. The doorbell rang, and I figured it was the neighbor dropping off a package. But there he was, Alex, standing on my porch with that same crooked grin, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Surprise," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mouth went dry. "What are you doing here?" I managed, gripping the doorframe. "Jake said he'd be home this weekend. Thought I'd crash for a couple days." "Didn't he tell you?" I shook my head, my mind racing. Jake hadn't mentioned a thing, and he wasn't due back until next month. Alex's grin faltered, but only for a second. "Guess I got the dates mixed up. Mind if I hang out anyway? I can head back tomorrow." Every instinct screamed to say no, to send him packing, but Tom's voice echoed in my head. He's a good kid, and I couldn't find a polite way out. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. Just for tonight. He settled in like he'd never left, dropping his bag in the guest room, raiding the fridge, chatting about some professor he hated. I kept busy, baking, cleaning, anything to avoid sitting still with him, but he followed me around, leaning on counters, asking questions about my paintings. "You've got real talent, Emily," he said, picking up a canvas I'd left out. "You should sell these." I shrugged, mumbled a thanks, but inside I was boiling. This wasn't his space anymore, his game to play. By the time Tom got home, I'd had enough. I pulled him aside, told him Alex had shown up uninvited, and asked if he could handle it. Tom frowned, confused, but nodded. "I'll talk to him," he said, and I retreated to our room, leaving the mess for him to sort out. I didn't hear the conversation, but an hour later, Tom came upstairs and said Alex was gone. Said he mixed up his plans, apologized for the trouble. Seemed off, though. Everything okay? I forced a smile, told him it was fine, just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't fine. Alex wasn't just a kid with a crush anymore. He was a loose thread, unraveling the control I'd fought so hard to keep. And I wasn't about to let him pull it all apart. That night, I blocked his number, deleted the texts, and swore I'd never let him catch me off guard again. Revenge had been sweet before, but now it was survival. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. My paintings started selling at a local gallery, small stuff at first, but enough to make me feel like I was building something. Tom and I really talked about things we'd let slide for years. He even started coming to my art shows, beaming like a proud kid when people complimented my work. Jake came home for Thanksgiving, alone this time, and didn't mention Alex once. I thought I'd won, outsmarted the game, turned the tables, and come out stronger. But then came a letter. It arrived in December, tucked in with the usual holiday cards. No return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting I didn't recognize at first. I opened it in the kitchen, Tom out shoveling snow, and my heart stopped. "Emily," it started, "I know you're done with me, and I get it. I pushed too hard. But I can't stop thinking about you, about what could have been. I'm not asking for anything, just needed you to know. You changed me too." I read it twice, then tore it up and shoved it in the trash, my hands shaking. Changed him? He had no right to dump that on me, no right to keep dragging me back. I thought I'd flipped the script, but here he was, rewriting the ending. I didn't tell Tom. Didn't tell anyone. But it lit a fire in me, not the warm, reckless kind from before, but a cold, determined one. I'd underestimated Alex. Thought he'd fade away when I stopped playing along. Now I saw it. He wasn't just a spark. He was a shadow, clinging to the edges of my light. So I doubled down. I poured everything into my art, my marriage, my life. Every brushstroke a middle finger to that letter. When spring rolled around, I heard through Jake that Alex had transferred schools, moved halfway across the country. Good, I thought. Let him go. But I kept one eye open just in case. Years later, at an art show in the city, I saw him. I was there with Tom, sipping wine and chatting with buyers, when I caught a glimpse of that dark hair, that familiar slouch across the room. He didn't approach, just stood there, staring at one of my paintings, a stormy abstract I'd called Unraveled. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw it. No grin, no challenge, just a quiet resignation. I turned away, leaned into Tom, and let him lead me to the next group of guests. When I looked back, Alex was gone. And this time, I knew he wouldn't be back. Revenge wasn't the torn-up letter or the blocked number. It wasn't even the life I'd built without him. It was that moment, me standing tall, him fading into the crowd, the tables turned for good. I'd taken his spark, his shadow, and made them mine. And as Tom squeezed my hand, whispering how proud he was, I smiled. The hook had caught, the twist had played out, and the ending? It was all mine to write. Seeing Alex at that art show should have shaken me, but it didn't. Not anymore. The air in the gallery was thick with chatter and clinking glasses, and Tom's arm around my waist felt like an anchor, steady and warm. I'd spent years bracing for moments like that, half expecting him to pop up, to throw me off balance again with those hazel eyes and that crooked grin. But when it finally happened, it was like watching a ghost drift by, powerless and distant. I didn't flinch, didn't falter. I just turned back to the conversation, laughing at some buyer's joke about my use of color, and let the night roll on. By the time we left, my painting, unraveled, had sold for more than I'd ever dreamed, and Alex was nothing but a smudge in the rearview mirror. Driving home with Tom that night, the city lights streaking past, I felt a quiet triumph settle in. It wasn't loud or flashy, no dramatic showdowns, no bitter words. It was deeper than that, a victory carved out of time and choices. Alex had been the matchstick, sure, the one that lit something wild and reckless in me all those years ago. But I'd taken that flame and shaped it, fueled it with my own hands until it burned brighter than he could have ever imagined. He thought he could keep me on a string, tugging whenever he felt like it, but I'd cut the line long before he realized it. And now I was the one standing in the light, while he lingered in the shadows of what might have been. The next morning, I woke up early, the house still hushed except for Tom's soft snores down the hall. I slipped into the guest room, my studio now, and stood among the canvases, the air thick with the scent of paint and possibility. I turned that space into something sacred, a place where I wasn't just Jake's mom or Tom's wife, but Emily, messy, bold, alive. I picked up a brush, dipped it in a deep crimson, and started on a new piece, letting the strokes flow without a plan. That's how I'd rebuilt myself, after all, one unplanned stroke at a time, until the picture made sense. Alex had been a detour, a jagged edge in the frame, but he wasn't the story. I was. Weeks later, Jake came home for a visit, his usual whirlwind of energy and dumb college stories. We were in the kitchen, me rolling out dough for his favorite cinnamon rolls, when he mentioned Alex offhand, like it was nothing, like he hadn't been a fault line in my world. He's doing some graphic design thing out west, Jake said, swiping a finger through the icing. Says he's finally figuring stuff out. I nodded, kept rolling the dough, and asked, good for him. How's your girlfriend? Jake grinned, launched into a tale about her latest prank, and that was that. Alex's name didn't linger, didn't weigh anything down. It was just a footnote, fading fast. But the real twist, the one I hadn't seen coming, hit me a month later. Tom had been quieter lately, not in a bad way, just thoughtful. I figured it was work, the usual stress of quotas and clients, but one night he sat me down at the dining table, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. I've been thinking, he started, rubbing the back of his neck like he did when he was unsure. You've been chasing your thing, painting, living bigger, and I love it. Makes me proud as hell. But I've been stuck, you know? Same job, same routine. I blinked, not sure where this was going. Then he pulled out a brochure, bright photos of mountains, a little cabin, a real estate listing. What if we sold the house, he said. Moved somewhere new, started fresh? I could retire early, you could paint full-time. Just us. My heart stuttered. After all these years, Tom was the one surprising me, flipping our script, stepping out of the lines we'd drawn so long ago. I thought of the house, the memories packed into every corner, and then I thought of Alex, of how he'd forced me to see the cracks in my good life. I'd fix those cracks myself, but maybe Tom was right. Maybe we didn't need the old frame anymore. Let's do it, I said, grinning, and he laughed, pulling me into a hug that felt like a promise. We stayed up late that night, plotting and dreaming, the brochure spread out between us like a map to something new. The move took months, selling the house, packing up decades of life, finding the perfect spot in Colorado with a view that stole my breath every morning. The day we left Chicago, I stood in the empty kitchen one last time, the echo of Alex's voice. You deserve more. Faint and powerless now. He'd been right, but not in the way he'd meant. I didn't need him to find my more. I'd done that with Tom, with my art, with the pieces of myself I'd reclaimed. As we drove west, the skyline shrinking behind us, I felt the last thread of that old story snap. Revenge wasn't just outsmarting Alex, it was outgrowing him, leaving him behind in a life I'd already rewritten. Settling into the cabin was chaos. Boxes everywhere, Tom grumbling about the Wi-Fi, me setting up my easel by the biggest window. But it was ours, a blank canvas we'd paint together. One afternoon, as I worked on a piece inspired by the jagged peaks outside, the mail arrived. Tucked among the bills was a postcard. No return address, just a scribbled note. Heard you moved. Looks like you found it. I stared at it, waiting for the old twist in my gut, but it didn't come. Instead, I smiled, flipped the postcard over. It was a generic Colorado scene and tossed it in the recycling. He didn't get it. I hadn't found anything because of him. I'd built it, step by step, with the people who mattered. That night, Tom and I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the mountain chill, watching the stars prick through the sky. Happy? He asked, his voice soft. I leaned into him, the weight of the past sloughing off like old paint. Yeah, I said. Really happy. And I was. Alex had been the hook, the twist that kept me on edge, but the ending, the real ending, was mine. I'd turned his game into my triumph, not with bitterness or spite, but with a quiet, unshakable strength. The listener could close the book now, knowing I'd won, not just against him, but for myself. And that, I thought, tracing the outline of the mountains in the dark, was the sweetest revenge of all.